I am the last person standing between you and your walk or your dinner or your reception. I'm sorry. I apologize. But I also hope we're going to end perhaps on a more positive or optimistic note than Richard wanted to start with. Because as well as that gloomy, dire prospect of what might be before us, there is hope. And it's really good that we followed your youth representatives. Young people's activism and commitment are probably the things that give me the most hope of all. But our research, has focused for a long time now on the impact of inequality. And we started out, we're epidemiologists, just thinking about inequality in relation to health. But it is, of course, an absolute precondition for sustainability. And when we're talking about sustainability, well-being economies are what we're talking about. We're talking about sustainable prosperity for people and planet. So we give things different labels sometimes, but this is what we mean. And there are 6 reasons why greater equality is a precondition for that better state. And that's a hopeful statement, because we can fix inequality. Governments can affect the level of socioeconomic inequality. In fact, they can barely move without affecting it, either positively or negatively. And countries do change their position on whether they're more equal or not. So things can be done. And if we tackle inequality, then we can tackle all of the grand challenges in front of us. So I'll start with a quote from Henry Wallach, who was formerly with the US Federal Reserve Bank. And he said, growth is a substitute for equality of income. So long as there's growth, there's hope. And that makes large income differences tolerable. So in a way, he's giving the rationale for what we've been living with so long, the neoliberal capitalist sort of drive. We don't have to worry about the inequality as long as there's growth. It's giving people hope. They'll think it's going to trickle down for them. Well, we know that's not true. And we know that actually growth no longer provides us with the kind of benefits we need, and it risks our planet. The planet's environmental limits mean that we can't just go on growing. We can't use growth as a substitute for greater equality. So we have to do things differently. And we like this slide. This shows GDP in the top line going up and up and up over time. That's what everybody has been pursuing, really at all costs. The bottom line is the genuine progress indicator, an indicator that has all of the bad things about GDP taken out of it, and it has flatlined for decades. We've been hearing this all day, really, that we're not getting any longer the benefits of pursuing GDP. And if we look at life expectancy, which is a really, it's a good measure of the well-being of the whole population, if we look at life expectancy in relation to GDP per person, we can see that in the poorer countries, as soon as they get a little bit richer, life expectancy goes up. And that's really important. Poorer countries need that economic growth for their life expectancy. But in the richer countries, we don't. As you move further over to the right on that chart, your country's getting richer and richer and richer, but above on this chart, about $15,000 to $20,000 per capita, you're not getting any life expectancy benefit. We've come to the end of what economic growth can do for life expectancy in the rich countries. So we need new models. We need new frameworks. Many of you will know this one. This is Kate Raworth's Donut Economics framework. And what she's doing here is giving us, I think, a really powerful new model for thinking about the future. In some ways, it's powerful because it's a circle, and it isn't just saying we've got to keep pursuing one thing up and up and up and up along a chart. We've got the planetary boundaries around the outside. We mustn't transgress them. We need to think about water quality, biodiversity, ozone depletion, climate change. We need to stay within those planetary boundaries, but we need to provide that social floor that is the inner circle. health for everybody, education, social equity, voice to people who don't have it, resilience, gender equality, all of the things that we've been hearing about today. So that's your floor for well-being. And within the planetary boundaries and above that social floor is the safe and just space for humanity. We could label that the well-being economy, or we could label that the well-being state, but that's where we want to be. And I think it's the kind of simple model that you can take to politicians, you can take to policymakers, you can use it to make policy. And cities across the world are doing so. They're using this to ask, what will be the impact of a policy I choose? Is it going to transgress a planetary boundary? Is it going to raise the social floor? And equality is central here. It's actually part of that social floor, but it does link all of those other social goods as well. So the second reason we need greater equality, if we're going to make this shift to sustainable well-being, is that policies to achieve sustainability are going to meet with widespread opposition unless we feel that the burden of making those changes is fairly shared. I'll give you an example of that. The Gilets jaunes protests in France. The policy that they were protesting was a good policy from a climate change, environmental point of view. But people didn't feel it was fair. They didn't feel that they were being shouldering a burden equally with everybody else in society. They felt that the unfair demands were being made of them. Huge protests couldn't get that policy change through. We need to think hard about how we share the burden of the necessary changes we're going to have to make if we're going to adapt to climate change and other emergencies. And we can do it. I mean, historically in the UK, we have had periods when our government, unlike today, made choices about moving towards greater equality because it needed to get the cooperation of the population for a national effort. This is a photo of Richard Titmuss, who was the father of social policy research, really. And he says that the wartime government, the government in the UK during the Second World War, recognized that the cooperation of the population was really essential to the war effort. And so they deliberately reduced inequalities and flattened the pyramid of social stratification to enable them to get the population support that they needed. They did it, it worked. Coincidentally, health improved faster during that decade than it had at other times. So we know we can make those changes, but we do know that equality underpins that cooperation. It's fundamental for that cooperation. So the third of these 6 points is that the environmental footprint of the rich is so massive that it has to be reduced, not just for the sake of social justice, but as an essential part of bringing the environmental crisis under control. World inequality is so extreme. Oxfam, the charity, international charity, go to Davos, to the World Economic Forum, every year, and they produce a report focused on inequality. And they usually manage to come up with a really good headline statistic that gets a lot of attention. This is one of theirs from a couple of years ago. 8 billionaires own the same wealth as the poorest 3.6 billion people in the world. 8 versus 3.6 billion. You could get those 8 people into that golf cart. I won't stop now and tell you what we should do with them once we got them into the golf cart. Again, it's a shame that the comedians aren't here any longer this afternoon. But that's the level of extreme wealth inequality that we have. And those people at the top, the rich, the powerful, those 1%, they emit far more carbon than the rest of us. They are responsible for the same amount of carbon emissions in 1 year as the poorest 10% manage in 2 decades. So there's another of those extreme inequalities. So a low earner, it would take them 26 years to produce as much carbon emissions as the richest do in 1 year. Reducing inequalities is going to reduce that heavy burden of emissions from the rich. It's going to help us save the planet. Fourth point, consumerism is a major threat to sustainability. We can't keep on consuming, whether that's consuming fossil fuels or the shopping we all do individually. It's all part of the same big consumerism picture. If we want to reduce our consumption, we've got to improve our equality, because inequality increases consumerism and overconsumption through its effect on status, through its effect on making us feel we need to buy more to prove our worth, in making us so sensitive to the judgment of others that we use our consumption to bolster ourselves against it. We're all susceptible to this. And so we know that to improve sustainability, we've got to bring consumption down. Therefore, we've got to tackle equality. And there are some nice research studies, I bet you thought I was going to forget them, but I've just remembered them, that show that in more unequal places, people are more likely to consume more, they're more likely to search online for high status goods, they're more interested in big powerful cars and those sorts of things. One of the studies said, didn't it, that in more unequal US states, people are Googling designer labels, and in more equal places, they're Googling chicken recipes, which I thought was really nice. We've done some work looking at this link between inequality and consumption, and found that the evidence suggests that inequality really is pushing up status consumption as people at each income level try to emulate those above them. And status anxiety is driving that. So that's a fairly recent paper. I'm sure all of these presentations are going to be shared with the audience at some point, so I hope you'll get the links that way. And our colleague Danny Dorling, who is Professor of Geography at the University of Oxford, has produced a number of charts like this, linking levels of inequality in a country to different kinds of consumption. This one is water. So more water used per person in more unequal countries. You see the same for fuel. You see the same for airline flights. You see the same for meat. You see all of those similarities. The fifth point is, it's really everything that Richard was talking about. Greater equality is a central determinant of health and well-being. So it's crucial that our policy making prioritizes well-being over economic growth. And that's the index chart that he showed you, linking inequality to health and social problems, just as a reminder of that huge range of evidence. And it's not just our work that sits there. There are meta-analyses looking at lots and lots of different studies of income inequality in relation to mental health, to physical health, studies that look at people over time, studies that look at health in relation to changing levels of income inequality. It's a really large and robust body of evidence. And we have published a paper that looks at it all within a causal framework. This is something that epidemiologists are good at doing. It's how we were able to eventually show that tobacco is related to lung cancer. You know, so we have a framework for looking at body of evidence, and we're convinced that this one is causal. And again, in relation to what Richard was saying, greater equality leads people to be more cooperative and mutually supportive. And that's essential if we're all going to pull together to provide one another with mutual support as we face environmental emergencies and disasters. Richard showed you charts linking income inequality to levels of trust in the population, to levels of civic participation. That's all part of this point. But we also know that more equal countries are better at recycling. They're more cooperative with government regulations about that. But also their business leaders think that their governments should comply with environmental agreements and regulations. So trust mutual support, those things are really critical, and equality is central to them. And so you won't be surprised if I show you that more equal countries produce less carbon dioxide per $100 of gross national product. That's really just a sort of concluding slide for everything we've been talking about, isn't it? But one last complicated chart, inequality and biodiversity. Richard and I we don't disagree entirely, but we have interesting discussions about what are the pathways that link income inequality to things like biodiversity. But it is to do with things like land tenure, people's power, who gets to influence environmental decision-making, those sorts of things. So 6 good reasons why equality, greater equality, is central to our transformation from immature societies that pursue economic growth at all costs to mature societies that pursue sustainable well-being and create well-being economies and well-being states. And I'm just going to finish with this last framework. This is a particular audience here. When we speak in America, we get asked a lot of questions about race equality or other kinds of inequality. And so we thought we'd just finish with this model here. And I think you referenced these kinds of things, Dora, in your talk earlier, the links between the vertical inequalities of power, economics, income, education, where people get stratified in a sort of social pyramid, a social hierarchy. Those intersect with all kinds of other inequalities, what we might think of as the horizontal inequalities of gender, age, sex, sexual orientation, disabilities, migrant status, etc., but also with geographic inequalities between places, between neighborhoods, between communities, between regions, between countries. And it's powerfully important to think about those intersections and how much worse those vertical inequalities are for those who experience the horizontal inequalities of demography, of identity, or geography. And in our policy making, in our politics, in our activism for change, we need to be taking all of those inequalities into account. So I'm going to stop. Those 6 points that I talked about, why greater equality is essential for sustainability, we've written those up in a paper for the Club of Rome, for the Earth for All Transformation Commission. They're available online. They're free, so do take a look. And we have a website, wilkinsonpickett.com, so please do visit there. We put our papers there, any blogs or podcasts we're doing, little videos. You can find links to things. You used to be able to see what Richard was tweeting about on there, but at the moment that seems to be suffering a post-Elon Musk problem. It might be a good thing, but that will probably be up and running again before too long. So thank you for inviting us to Iceland. It's been a real pleasure to be here and spend time with you all. Good luck in your transition, Iceland and the other well-being economy governments. You are leading lights and showing the rest of the world what to do. And we're just jealous, aren't we, really? We'd like to live in a well-being economy.
Can I say that coming to this conference has made me feel there is a real movement moving forwards. And that's, very exciting and gives me hope, despite what I started off by saying.
Thank you. I think we're done now.
Yes.